and welcome to the first ever episode of the Zag Talk Podcast. I'm your host, Carson Hollyoak, and I'm joined by my co-hosts, Merry and Dylan Graff, and we're super excited to bring you a new podcast that'll be jam-packed with Gonzaga basketball content because there's truly never enough of it out there. If the Zag Talk name sounds familiar, that's because this is an extension of a Twitter account I started last year after my fiance lovingly told me that I needed an outlet to talk about Gonzaga basketball. If you don't already, go give @Zag Talk a follow on Twitter. This podcast will include anything from game previews and reviews to recruiting updates and past player and manager interviews. In this episode, we're going to be talking about our major takeaways from the Zags' hot start to the season with big wins over number 6 Kansas and number 11 West Virginia. And we're also going to talk about the disappointing cancellation of the Baylor game and the recent news of the shutdown of the basketball operations until December 14th. But first, I want to take a minute to introduce ourselves to you all. As I said before, my name is Carson Hollyoak, and I graduated from Gonzaga in 2018, and I'm now living in the Portland, Oregon area. Growing up in Western Washington, I was a casual Gonzaga fan, but I was a big-time basketball fan, and some people may even say I was a bit of a basketball nerd. I played high school ball at Bellarmine Prep in Tacoma, Washington, and originally went down to the University of Redlands in Southern California with the intent to play Division III basketball. But I ultimately transferred to Gonzaga partway through my freshman year. I still consider this the best decision of my life. Met my fiance there and just love the atmosphere and the community that all of you know about. And really, since I got there, I've lived and breathed Gonzaga basketball, and that's why we're here now making a podcast. With that, I'm going to pass it over to my brother-in-law and fellow Zag, Merry, aka B Merry, and let him introduce himself to you all.
Hey, thanks, Carson. Hi, everybody. I'm Brian. Most of my friends and acquaintances know me as B Merry. As Carson just mentioned, we've got a little bit of a Richard Fox, Sean Mallon thing going on. For more context on that, go listen to the recent Sack and Jack Believe in the Zags podcast from last week when Rob Sacre and Jack Ferris talked to Richard Fox about that whole situation. Long story short, my wife is his sister. The relationship was obviously contentious at first, but we're all good now. Right, Carson?
Yeah, you're all right. You're only marrying Natalie and I in about 8 months, so.
I feel for her. I feel for her. Joining the fam. At any rate, I attended GU and graduated in 2016. While at Gonzaga, I had the pleasure of sporting the yellow intramural ref shirt for 3 years and the red supervisor shirt for my senior year. Since graduating, I moved down to the Bay Area for 3 years with Mackenzie, my wife, and Carson's sister, obviously. We were down there because she was finishing up chiropractic school. While down there, we attended many of the Bay Area Zag game watches. Shout out to Haley and Steven Gerlich, who set an absolutely outstanding example for what the alumni chapters should look like in order to maximize post-grad engagement. And since Mackenzie graduated, we've actually moved back to Western Washington and are now the co-presidents of the Tacoma alumni chapter, which was actually the inaugural Gonzaga alumni chapter, started back in the early 2000s. Like Carson, I'm a little bit of a data nerd and big-time lurker on Zag/College Hoops Twitter. Really stoked about the content and interviews we've got coming and excited to share it with everyone. So with that said, I'll let the third member of our tricky trio, Dylan, introduce himself.
Tricky trio, great reference to this year's Julian Strother, Dom Harris, and of course Jalen Suggs, as they were referred to as we were recruiting them, and now they're obviously all at Gonzaga. Like B Merry and Carson, I was also a recent graduate of Gonzaga University. In fact, I graduated the same year as Carson. We were even roommates. After he turned me down to be roommates sophomore year, he did accept my invitation to be roommates in Florence while we were studying abroad together. However, unlike Carson, I did not have the skill to play anything besides high school basketball, and at a low level, even in that respect. I've also, however, like Carson, lived and breathed Gonzaga basketball from the moment I stepped foot in Spokane. While I was at GU, I spent 2 years on the kennel board, which, if you went to Gonzaga, you know is probably both the largest and most hated organization on campus. In my senior year, I was actually our social media guy, so spent a lot of time on the Zag Twitter and have been pretty addicted ever since. I may not have the statistical background that B Merry and Carson are going to go into, but B Merry also referred to me in our first group meeting as the intangibles guy. Sounds a lot like in high school, and they told me to stop trying to score. So I'll be focusing a little more on the color commentary piece, maybe adding in some pieces on recruiting, a little bit more of the social media aspect. think with that, we can launch right into a recap of the Zags season so far. I think kind of starting off with week one, our first big game of the season against Kansas. We could talk a little bit about Auburn and going into West Virginia as well.
Yeah, absolutely. To get it kicked off, why don't we go around and give just some quick hitters on Kansas, the Kansas game. So Carson, why don't you start?
Yeah, I mean, there's not as much to take away, I think, from this game as maybe the West Virginia game because we look so good. I think the biggest takeaways for me was just Jalen Suggs' explosiveness and his ability to take over a game, as we saw kind of down the stretch after he got back into the game after some early foul trouble. But just our guards overall, I think it's a level of athleticism we haven't seen before at Gonzaga. We're used to a lot of, going back a ways, the white guys who can shoot it, and we haven't really ever had a whole lot of slashers and cutters and drivers, and this team's full of them, almost maybe to a fault with the lack of shooting, but we can get into that later. Dylan, how about you?
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway for me was the guard work. I think the ability for us to have Nembhard ready to go this season, which I think we didn't expect. A lot of people thought he was going to have to sit out the season. He put in a waiver to be able to play. And I think a couple days, around a week before the Kansas game, he was cleared to play for the rest of the season, or for the entirety of the season, I guess. And so for me, I think part of it was that. I think one of the bigger things was our lack of interior defense. Obviously, Kansas didn't take too much of advantage of that. They weren't a huge team, so that was good. We can talk more about how we matched up against West Virginia later in that aspect. But I was disappointed in the first showings of Ballo and Watson so far this season, I think, in that game. But I think for both of them, it's for Watson, it's coming off an injury, and for Ballo, it's really playing his first collegiate basketball games. So I think we can dive in a little bit more into how those two debuts looked.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think more than anything, it really showed where our strength is going to be as a team throughout this entire season, which is absolutely the offense. First game, I believe, in the Bill Self era, where a team put up more than 100 points in regulation, which just says a lot about how far this team can go offensively. And so I think that's really the overarching theme for the entire season at this point. And really looking forward to seeing how this team progresses offensively. I think they're just going to get better and better, which is absolutely insane. But defensively, there are definitely some questions, and I know we'll get into that a little bit more in a second when we talk about the West Virginia game. So obviously, with that, why don't we pivot a little bit? The Kansas game was quite a while ago. I think the West Virginia game is really the one that is fresh on everyone's mind. So why don't we chat about that a little bit? The emergence of Andrew Nembhard, MVP, in the West Virginia game. What did you guys think about that?
I'll kind of piggyback off of what Dylan said in his takeaways from the Kansas game. Is just, it's huge that we have him. Suggs went down and with what looked like was going to be maybe a season-ending injury, and I know we were all texting each other just like, holy crap, what does this even mean? I mean, we still have a really good team. We have a deep front court or a back court, excuse me. But that was kind of scary. And he just took over right away. You know, he can score. He did it at Florida for 2 years. So, I mean, that's just huge to have that depth. I know we have Aaron Cook on the bench, but he just doesn't give you that level of scoring ability that Nembhard does. And just to be able to have another person who can create their own shot, who can get to the rim, it's huge. I don't think he is Jalen Suggs, but it's pretty nice to have him as another option to pair him on the court at the same time too.
Yeah, I think we've had a history of bringing in guards, whether it be grad transfers or guys who sit through for a year or part of a year like McClellan did, guys that can come in and create their own shot and be able to score. And I think as much as I like Cook, I don't know if he was ready to step into that role of being our main guard off the bench who's also asked to score. So I'm really glad we have a guy coming off the bench as of right now in Nembhard in that, you know, he's able to step in. He's going to play starter level minutes as well. I think that's the other thing is I don't know if we could lean on Cook to play 25 minutes a game. Nembhard played 35 in the West Virginia game. Obviously, you know, slightly inflated by the fact that we didn't have Suggs for part of that game. But a guy who can come in off the bench and score like that and be able to create his own shot, I think is going to be huge for them this year.
I think what took me with the Suggs injury, what it took me back to was when Nigel tweaked his ankle in the championship game. It was kind of a scary moment. It was one of those feelings of like, oh no, what's going to happen? We're losing our best player right now. And the fact that Nembhard was able to jump in and immediately fill that role was just incredible. And I think the thing that stuck out to me was his ability not only to create his own shot, but it seemed like every single time down the floor, he was making a play. And that's evident with with a graphic that we'll share on Twitter, the Gonzaga weighted assist network, which at first it's kind of an eyesore. It's hard to tell what's going on there, but the fact of the matter is Nembhard makes everyone on the floor better. And in that game, I don't know, he just made so many plays for other folks, along with being able to drive to the basket and just be that threat. So without him, I really don't think that we come away with the win. I mean, what do you guys think?
No, I totally agree. And I think when we saw Suggs go down, I think, including Nembhard, I think everybody on the team was pretty stunned, right? You've got a guy who's coming in. He's the highest touted recruit we've ever had. He showed exactly what he can do in the Kansas and Auburn games. I mean, we knew that he was going to be our guy this year. And to see somebody like that go down in your third game of the season against a great team, nonetheless, I think was a huge shock to them. And I do think they gave up a couple baskets in a row there, and look a little staggered. But I think Nembhard really stepped in, was taking the ball hard to the basket too. I think we were settling for a lot of outside shots at that point in the game, which has not been our friend so far this season. I think we can talk a little bit about the 3-point shooting woes so far. But that was kind of my initial takeaway was Nembhard was really the only guy who kind of started to right the ship a little bit. I definitely think earned the NemVP tag that he was getting on Twitter for that game. I think as much as it was cool to see Suggs come back and play in the second half, it was really cool to see Nembhard step up in that role.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what's so funny is, and we were texting about this during the game, but all the different types of adversity. I mean, to have a player like Suggs go down in the way that he did, it rattled the team. I mean, there was a good, for the remainder of the first half, I think someone mentioned the word deflated. That's exactly how it felt. Not just for the fans, but the players with their body language and everything. They just looked deflated. So the fact that he was able to come back, I think was massive for the team. But again, to have Andrew Nembhard step into that role is just insane. I mean, Carson, what do you think? Do they win the game if Nembhard doesn't play?
I really don't think so, because one thing is that, like you had just said, when they said on the broadcast even that they seemed kind of deflated, they came into the game, they're kind of messing around, they're laughing, they're smiling, and when they went into halftime and came back out, it was strictly business. And you even saw that in Nembhard. When he came out in the second half, he punched him right in the face. He came out there and he had a few transition buckets, and he just had I think he kind of went into halftime and was just like, all right, now I got to step up and do it. And I think that took him a little bit to understand that was his new role in this game. And I think that's the thing with Mark Few teams and Gonzaga teams in general, is it's kind of the next guy up, and there's no real selfishness, because Nembhard can do that on a regular basis, which is why having him is such a huge thing, because I don't know if Aaron Cook can come off the bench and give you those points. Obviously, we didn't have Harris this game, but Dom, I don't know if he's ready to come in and make that kind of difference either. So having that extra body and that extra, former power conference player, former 5-star recruit is huge. But I mean, give props to Nembhard too, just because to be able to make that switch and flip that switch within a singular game is pretty difficult. As I know, probably you guys can attest to, just seeing it from other games and playing in games yourselves. It's pretty tough to kind of change your whole mindset on what you're going to do that game. But yeah, another thing I wanted to jump into with that chart we were talking about that was originally tweeted out by Luke Benz at RexBeck730 on Twitter. If you guys want to go give it a look, is kind of comes back to this question of who's the go-to guy, who can create their own shot. And I think this chart actually does a good job of laying that out a little, when you look at it, Jalen Suggs by far has the most unassisted baskets on this team this year. And that kind of just shows that he's able to create his own shot, whether it's through deflections and steals and getting out in transition or just attacking the hoop off the pick and roll, or even just squaring his guy up and taking him to the rack. It's, like I said, it's something like we haven't seen before. Nigel could create his own shot pretty well, but the amount of athleticism that comes with Jalen, I think, is huge. And I think for me, and I know we've discussed this before, is who's going to be the guy who gets that shot when the going gets tough, when we need a bucket at the end of the game. And I think in the Kansas game, he showed that he's that guy as of right now. I know Corey can knock down a shot, and so can Timmy. I mean, Timmy's great, and we haven't really talked about his great start to the season, but I feel like clock's ticking down. You really need a bucket. I think it's got to be in Jalen's hands because he's the guy who can create, and that's really what you need in that situation. What do you guys think?
Look, everyone's said this. This is kind of a beating a dead horse here, but we've never had a player like Jalen Suggs. We just never have. And there have been players that can make the plays like he does, but I don't know if we've ever had a player that can feed himself like he does. And he always just seems to understand what play to make if he's creating a shot for himself. If he's in transition, he always seems to know whether or not to pass. More often than not, he's taking it right to the rim. And that football attitude that he has definitely shows through. But I think that you're right. At the end of the game, you want the ball in his hands. At the same time, it really is a luxury to have guys like Ayayi and Kispert out on the perimeter and Drew Timme in there to kind of seal off and create space when that final shot's going up.
When you have a guy like Suggs, I don't think necessarily talking about like the last shot of the game, but when you have a guy like Suggs who can get hot and you're going to have to double him, you're going to have to change up your defense. I mean, you play closer to Suggs, you leave the ability for Ayayi and Kispert to just sit on the outside and shoot the ball, right? Catch and shoot. And I think having a guy like Timme, whether it be, high post handoffs, pick and rolls, I think being able to have a big man paired with a guard is just so deadly, especially in the college basketball game. And especially for a team like Gonzaga, who I think really emphasizes ball movement and getting assists. I think the biggest thing of that weighted assist network, obviously it's looking specifically at assists, but I think it just shows the amount of passing that also goes on in this team in general. Everybody's assisting everybody. And I think that's always been a mainstay of Fuse offenses throughout the years, whether it's a guard heavy or a front court heavy offense.
Yeah, definitely. Let's talk about some of the different lineups that we've been able to run, because I think it's no secret on Zag Twitter at this point what is the quote unquote death lineup. but the 4-guard lineup of Nembhard, Ayayi, Suggs, Kispert, and Timme. I mean, is there a more deadly offensive lineup in the country?
No, definitely not.
I don't think so. From a skill across the board, having all 5 guys on the court at the same time, I don't think there's a team that can match that from a skill at every individual position perspective.
Well, any of those guys can give you 20 points any night. And I mean, we've seen that. I think the only one who hasn't the only one who hasn't is Nembhard, who had 19 against West Virginia. So, I mean, that's a pretty tough lineup. And it kind of reminds you of, it's small ball, kind of like the Warriors death lineup, with the small ball there, although we obviously can't shoot it like they can. But I mean, that team in transition, they're able to defend well as long as you're not getting it into the post, which, I mean, I don't think our rim protection is great anyway, and we can get into that later. But yeah, I mean, that team, there's so much athleticism there. There's so much offensive ability, and it's fairly diversified in terms of, like, you do have shooters, you have an inside presence. Those guys they're unselfish. They'll pass the ball. They move it around really well. That's been something that's been really impressive to me too. Is just the way that they share it, the way that they create opportunities for their teammates has been really fun to watch this year.
Yeah, I think the only weak spot in that lineup being rebounding, I think, Carson, you mentioned this when we were talking the other day. I think Joel can fall asleep on defense sometimes. I think that's a weak spot, especially if you're going to be playing a 4-guard lineup. You can't have guys backdoor cutting and getting to the rim because Timmy can only be in one place at a time. I think that the other weak spot is been the rebounding. We saw West Virginia hit the boards against us, got a ton of offensive boards, especially in the first half. I'm going to butcher the crap out of these names, but Tshiebwe and Culver, who obviously started, but then also, and this is the one I'm going to butcher, Osa Bihoen, who came off the bench. All three of those guys, I think, had multiple offensive boards. Let's see. Tshiebwe had 3, Culver had 5, Ashibin only had 1, but I think the ability for them to hit the boards against a lineup like that's really going to hurt us. Kispert looks good defensively as a quote unquote guard playing a big man position. I think he's truly a forward. He's not going to play much guard this year, but I think rebounding is going to be tough for them. Although Suggs has impressed me a lot so far as a guy who can get boards as a guard.
Yeah, that struck me as being his contribution in the second half. He only had 4 points, but he came up with some massive rebounds down the stretch, which again, going into halftime, you would not have believed that he was doing what he was doing out there, grabbing rebounds like that. We can't have an episode talking about this game without talking about the contribution of Joel Ayayi. I mean, he is arguably the 5th option in that lineup, which is insane. And he finished the game with 21 points, 7 rebounds, 4 assists, and 4 steals. Even though they play 2 very different roles on the team, you could compare that with Timmy's game against Kansas, where he just filled up the stat book. So I really think that while yes, he does at times look a little bit lackadaisical out there, he always seems to make a freaking play. It's absolutely insane to me what he's able to do. And those steals that he had also came at a very pivotal time. I think he stripped the ball away from a big time rebound down the stretch from I believe it was Culver before he fouled out. I think that you can't discount the contribution that Ayayi made. Again, even though he's arguably the 5th option in the lineup when those 5 are on the floor. So.
Definitely. Well, yeah, and you said he makes plays. He makes winning plays, and you just talked about some of those there. And I mean, last year he did it on offense against UW, and I'm blanking on the other game that he had a huge shot down the stretch. But I mean, gets steals, he gets rebounds, he gets the hustle plays, and we were just talking about rebounding on this team and how well our guards rebound, and he's leading our team in rebounds right now with 7.7 per game. So, I mean, that's one thing that did stand out too, is our guards rebound the crap out of the ball. It's really crazy. I mean, Drew Timme has had, I think, 1 game with double-digit rebounds, and I don't think that's him not being physical, although he wasn't super physical in the first half of the West Virginia game. But I think that's just more of a product of our guards crash the board super hard, and they like to get out and run when they do, which is really fun to watch. But another thing I'll say with Ayayi is that, and I've said it to you guys before too, is I'm really impressed with his, I don't know if you call it composure, but he hasn't seemed stressed out or trying to take over at different times, which I thought we might see this year because he's not the top option or top 2, top 3. You know, he gave up a chance to go to the NBA or at least go pro to come back. And we were talking about it. I don't know if he's going to be in a better position after this season than he was last season. And that takes a lot to, really give yourself to the team and make those sacrifices. And he knows he's not going to get his points by kind of taking over one-on-one ball like you might see Jalen Suggs attacking, but he's going to get his points, he's going to get his boards, and he's going to make those winning plays, which hopefully NBA scouts are going to see and take down.
B. Mary, as you said it, he had the silent 19-6-4 against West Virginia. I think that was huge. As much as I was ragging on his defense, I do think he had a phenomenal game against West Virginia, especially when you have somebody like Suggs go down. We've talked a lot about, Nembhard being the guy who stepped up, but I really do think, and especially in the second half, really the whole team stepped up and were able to bring them back in that way. And I think you mentioned it earlier, but Suggs going down, I think you said making football plays and attacking the basket. I also think him coming back from that injury is a football play as well. For those of you who aren't aware, listening to the podcast, Suggs was highly touted in high school as both a point guard at his Minnesota high school, but also as a QB at his high school as well. Got offers from Minnesota to play both sports, was looked at from Ohio State from a football perspective, chose Gonzaga. He did an interview with Andy Katz talking about how awesome the team was when he first came in and how accepting they were of him, playing 7-on-7 pickup football out in the field to give him a little bit of taste of that football still. And I think it shows for me, like the football mentality to go down with an ankle injury like that, or a hamstring or whatever you want to call it, whatever it was, to try to walk that off in the hallway as we saw through most of the first half. Obviously went back and had some stuff done at halftime, but to come back out in the second half and play and still have, a pretty good game against West Virginia was pretty phenomenal for me to see that turnaround from him. Do we think going forward we're going to see the same Suggs whenever we do resume basketball play?
I think having the break here is probably even better, unless he's not able to get the work and the maintenance that he would have otherwise. I'm not sure how that works with shutting down the program for a week or so, but I mean, you got to think it helps not having to play 4 games in a 10-day span or whatever it was. So, I mean, I think he'll be fine. I think you get used to playing through injuries towards the end of the season. Like you said, with playing football, which, be Mary, did you know that Jalen Suggs played football? I wasn't sure. I hadn't heard that yet. I also heard Killian Tilly may have been from a volleyball family. Did you know that? I didn't know.
Well, I also heard that David Stockton is the son of John Stockton as well. I don't know if you guys knew that, but
who?
At this point, right? I feel like at this point, people want to forget about the people that only played 10 years ago.
Well, look, here's my final takeaway from the way that the West Virginia game went and where we are in the season right now. After the Kansas game, it really felt like this team was going to be different, and it made me a little bit nervous for one reason. The scoring was really not very balanced in that Kansas game. I mean, we had 3 guys scored 20 plus points, which is very non-traditional for a Gonzaga team. And the reason why that makes me nervous is because I'm reminded of the early 2010s years where, if a Kelly Olynyk, for example, would only score 5 points in a game, that would be it. It'd be over. The team had no chance. But here we are. We are 3 games into the season, and we've got 5 guys averaging double figures, 2 guys averaging 20 points or more a game. And so it's really interesting. The more things change, the more things stay the same. And so that's ultimately my takeaway from the West Virginia game and where we're at in the season so far. I don't know. What are your guys' just main takeaways from that game and from where we're at?
I guess I'll play a little devil's advocate there. I was going to bring up that we do have 5 players averaging double digits. I think after that, the next closest is 3, and Watson's one of those. That's one of my big takeaways is Watson. I mean, he's made some really good plays, and we can get into this in a later podcast, but some of the lineups that he's been a part of have been some of the most productive and efficient lineups. Obviously, his defense is there, but I'd love to see a little more confidence from him. Right now, he kind of has that look where he just really isn't comfortable out there, and hopefully in this time off, he can kind of get that back going and just look comfortable. I think one of the charges in the West Virginia games where he just looked like a deer in headlights. He didn't know if he should shoot it. He didn't know if he should attack hard and, just get back to where he's going at the rim hard. I'd rather him get a charge by plowing a dude over than kind of the awkward, like, oh crap, I'm stuck. And then my other one, you just talked about balance, be Mary, but balance in a different way. Our points distribution is really interesting right now. We have gotten 67.4% of our points from 2-pointers so far, which is the 4th highest in the nation, and only 17.2% from 3-pointers, which is 273rd in the country. We're only shooting 29.1% from 3, which is not great. I don't think it's going to be that bad all season, but I think that is going to be one of our weaknesses down the stretch, and kind of worries me a little if a team, I could see someone like San Francisco, because they seem to always game plan for us really well. They pack the paint and make us shoot. And what are you going to do? I mean, we got to knock those down. So hopefully that turns around. But you love to see him pounding the paint too. That's fun. Dylan, how about you?
Yeah, I think takeaways for me, wanted to see how Watson and Ballo develop. I mentioned that at the top of the podcast. Ballo had a pretty weak showing against Kansas. I think everybody was a little bit concerned. He kind of seemed to just be throwing the ball at the hoop a little bit. Wasn't rebounding super well. Wasn't very aggressive. I do think in the West Virginia game, he stepped in a little bit better. Got some good boards. Had that quick and one at the beginning of that game as well. That looked really, really nice. So I think he's going to come into his own. I think he's going to be a really good contributor off the bench by the end of the year. I don't think he's going to step into the Baby Shaq nickname that he was given when he was in high school, when he was younger, before he came to GU. This year, I do see him having a career progression, potentially something much closer to Rui, in that like his second or third season, he's really going to turn it on. We're going to have an absolute beast in the paint. I think the other piece for me is the Watson thing. I think something that hurts us a little bit taking off these next couple of games. Looking forward in the schedule, but taking off these next couple of games, we're not playing until we're not practicing until the 14th, from what I understand. So I don't know what individual workout's going to look like, but I think the biggest thing is actually missing out on these Tarleton and these, Northwest State games that we were supposed to have, NAU. In those games, those are the confidence builders for guys like Cook and Nembhard. Obviously, he's gotten his confidence boost now, I think, but for guys like Cook and Watson and Harris and Strother as well, who hopefully will be able to contribute in the later half of the season when we get to WCC play, those are the games where they build confidence. I think you reminded me, Carson, Watson dropped 20 plus against some crappy team beginning of last year before he went down with a shoulder injury. So for us to miss out on a couple of those games, I think is going to hurt us a little bit. That's part of what this season is going to end up looking like. We're not going to get a full season. We're not going to get a normal season by any sense. I think those are my two big, looking forward things. I think big takeaway from the West Virginia game is the guard play, being able to push the ball. I think the defense is really, despite not having a statistical advantage in a lot of defensive categories, I do think, especially when Suggs is out on the court, the defense does tend to play with a foot forward, get steals, push the ball, or transition. I think this year is going to be really fun to watch. I know previously we've had guys that can dunk like Clark, but I think as a whole, having a guard who can take off like Suggs is going to be really exciting to watch the rest of the season.
Definitely. Yeah, it's a different defense this year. I think this is a good time to kind of move into our next kind of segment, which is talking about the cancellation, as you just talked about, and how we're not going to have a normal season this year. We've seen that. We just got the news today. We're recording on Sunday that we're shutting down until the 14th. I think we'll get back to practice on the 15th. So we're going to have the Tarleton State, the Southern, Northern Arizona, and the Idaho games canceled. Won't play again until the 19th. And this all started with the Baylor game being canceled, where we had one new player test positive for COVID-19 and another part of our traveling party. We know that it was a player who didn't play in the West Virginia game. So you're looking at a handful of walk-ons, and I think Zakharov and Arlauskas. But we don't have any information on who that was. Not that it really matters. It seems like they're making the right move here to shut it down, and by canceling that game, you got to play it safe. With all this going on, cases are spiking again. So props to them on making the right choice there. I know it's tough. But for the Baylor game, they've made it clear they want to reschedule, and there's a few different scenarios they're looking at. I've written down some of the different scenarios here that they could do. They both play on the 21st and 29th of December. Baylor plays the 21st against Arkansas Pine Bluff and the 29th against Central Arkansas, and GU plays against Northwestern State on the 21st, Dixie State on the 29th. Sounds like they're willing to drop one of those non-conference games if they have to. I'm not sure how that really works out with them being bye games, and I know a lot of these programs are hurting this year without having fans there and everything, so those bye games are huge for them, so hopefully they're not screwing them over that much. I think we would much rather see, and the nation would probably much rather see, the Baylor game. But so we're looking at potentially the 21st in South Dakota if they want to do a neutral court, which I know they've talked about wanting to keep that the case. We would stay there after the Iowa game. South Dakota's been a little more lenient, for better or worse, probably worse, like Florida. But that's a possibility. Or you're looking at maybe the 24th or 26th. Since that's some opening times. I know Coach Drew over at Baylor was planning to send his players home for Christmas, which I don't know about you guys. That seems like
that's a recipe
maybe the worst possible idea ever. I mean, you're sending these guys all over the country. they play on the 21st. They play 8 days later. How can you possibly quarantine there? He was going to talk to the players and see what they thought about that. So the CDC and every other health official out there is saying, for people like us, even, don't go travel, don't have large gatherings for the holidays. So I don't know how that would be advisable, but yeah, I don't know. What are you guys thinking there? Do you think at this point, do you think it's better to try to get that on the schedule? Oh, I mean, I guess we have the 4 games canceled now. It doesn't even matter in terms of amount of games played. It's either going to get played or it's not. But
yeah, so here's my thing. I think you can kind of see with the schedule what Mark Few is trying to do, which is schedule games like you would play in the tournament, or the way that you would play in the tournament, with a day of rest. Playing 4 games back to back with a day of rest each. I mean, that's obviously a little bit more aggressive than the tournament, since there's a week in between the, I believe, second round, or what's now the third round in the Sweet 16. But what's really interesting about that is it seems like what Mark Few was trying to do was schedule 4 games in a row in that kind of back to back type of succession, and then follow it up with a tough game, which, to my mind, what that would do is basically ask the question and then answer the question: can this team refocus after a string of what should be blowouts to play a much tougher opponent after that? Which I think has, in the past, you could argue, has been a little bit of an issue. Now, the way that it's setting up, it's looking like we're trading that for potentially what could be a Final Four and a championship game with Iowa, a day of rest, and then Baylor. So it still, again, feels a little bit March-y to me, but just a little bit different in the way that it's now potentially set up. I don't know. Dylan, what do you think?
I think Mike Roth and Mark Few also aren't stupid. I think they went in the beginning of the season knowing that there's no way whatever schedule we put together at the beginning of the season, that's now how it's going to end at the end of the year. And I think for them to try to schedule a, first couple, because I think everyone knew we were going to get a couple games under our belt to start the season. So to try to line up Kansas, Auburn, West Virginia, Baylor in your first, 2-3 weeks, I think that's Mark Few trying to create a resume that might only contain 12 to 15 games by the end of the season. I don't know what the requirements are going to look like for our March Madness tournament this year. I think you're going to have a complete imbalance of games played. I think you're going to have some conferences say, screw it, and shut down conference games. I think, depending on where this pandemic goes, who knows what's going to happen. I think it changes week to week on how optimistic I am about us having a normal season. I think even the NFL is playing on a razor thin wire. They rescheduled Baltimore and Pittsburgh, 4 or 5 times to try to get that game in, but they also made Denver play without a starting quarterback because they had all 4 quarterbacks sit. So I think we see the scheduling woes there. I think Gonzaga knew they had to get big games on the calendar to start. I think they probably took into account they're going to have to cancel some games this year, and I think they were smart in creating a week or so of games that are pretty cancelable. I think they would have liked to start that right after they played Baylor, but being able to potentially reschedule Baylor, take a week or 2 off, be able to quarantine, get healthy, get to a place that they can create a bubble and be able to take on teams like Iowa and Baylor in back-to-back games, I think would be huge for them. I think they've taken the right precautions this year. Carson, you let us know that they were doing a A-team, B-team bus scenario, having all the starters on one bus, some of the coaching staff on that bus, the rest of the team on the other half of the bus. I think they're making the right decisions to hopefully play as many games as they can this season. We'll see how many we end at. I don't know what conference play is going to look like.
If the WCC was smart, they would create a bubble and put it in Vegas.
Oh my, we have to do it, but I don't think the WCC is playing. Well, you can't, California, you can't even have games right now. So That's over half the conference. You have to have a bubble, and hopefully they get on that because they've kind of been dragging their feet. They've had months, almost a whole year, you think about it at this point, to put something together. And there have been rumors of it and nothing now. But Dylan, you talked about the amount of games that are needed to be played. I went and looked up, at least from the beginning of the year this year, my understanding is that you have to play a minimum of 13 games to be eligible for the tournament. Right now, we're looking at 22 with those games being canceled, 23 if we add Baylor to that without taking out one of our other ones. So, we got room for disaster to really hit. But when you bring that down to WCC play and you don't really have a plan, that can get ugly really quick. So we talked about how that might affect seeding and everything at the end of the year. I think this team, with games that we've played and hopefully will play against Iowa and Baylor, that's not going to be an issue. I think it's pretty clear the talent and skill of this team that it's not really going to hurt us. But you've seen it in football. There's Pac-12, not that there was a team that was good enough to be in the playoff anyway this year, but they're kind of screwing themselves by playing so few games and not really having a backup plan for games being canceled. You're not putting yourself in a place to succeed. So hopefully we don't see that happen. Hopefully we play the rest of the year with as few hiccups as possible and we can go win a national championship. But
I think this year is different. It feels different. And I think the reason why is because, to me, the seeding for the tournament doesn't necessarily play as big of a role. And this may just be kind of, I don't know, maybe arrogance on my part, but if we were to lose against Iowa and Baylor, we would definitely we'd probably be bounced out of the top 10. But barring something completely disastrous where we lose 3 games in conference play, we get bounced out early in the WCC tournament, something like that, I really don't see a scenario where we are not a 2 seed, a 3 seed at the very worst. That would be disaster mode, though. I think that's just kind of my feeling, which is totally different from other years. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think ideal scenario for them would be to get one out of if we reschedule Baylor, to get 1 out of 2 between Baylor and Iowa, and then go just wipe WCC play clean across. What I would love to see happen is them create some sort of bubble, like you mentioned. I would love it if WCC would just bring all the teams together, whether it's still doing a schedule like they have put out now in a bubble. I think the other option is you create a scenario where you do a couple of round robin games over a couple of weeks. It's a lot of games in a short period of time, but you get 10 or 12 games under the belt for each of these teams, or I should say probably something closer to 8 to 10. And then you do a normally seeded WCC tournament. You do that all within a bubble. You get everybody the minimum amount of games you need to get to March Madness. And you go from there, hopefully winning some sort of mock WCC tournament, whatever it ends up looking like. That gives us a 1 or a 2 seed. That's my hope. I think we end this season. It's hard because of COVID. Suggs and Kispert, test positive before a game. We still play. Who knows what that game looks like? But I think all things being held relatively steady from where we're at now, I see us finishing with 2, maybe 3 losses. Hopefully no WCC losses and a 1 or a 2 seed in whatever March Madness looks like.
And I could easily see us running the table too. I think that's as much in the question as a 2 or 3 loss team. But yeah, and hopefully the NCAA is paying attention to what's happening right now and realizes that they need to put more space, more time in between conference tournaments ending and the tournament starting, because it doesn't matter if you do a bubble or one location if you're not giving the teams enough time to quarantine before those tournaments. And hopefully by then we have a vaccine that's around there, but I don't think it's going to be spread out to those people by that time. So I don't know. Hopefully people are doing the smart thing and making these plans so we don't end up super depressed in March once again. So
that's nightmare scenario for sure.
Yeah. Well, before we close, I think there was one thing that was pretty cool on Zag Twitter and just Twitter in general this week. We had King James, the GOAT himself. I don't care your thoughts on who the GOAT is, but
that's a whole other episode, Carson. We can get into it. I don't know if I agree that he's the GOAT, but yeah, we can get into it later.
Okay, so anyway, the GOAT tweeted, they tough, love the way they play, amazing pace, makes or misses, ball movement, some dogs and guys that just know how to play the game. And of course, they are beyond well coached. He's the truth, the shiznit. So
I love
we're
that.
now only referring to Mark Few as Coach Shiznit. That's his name on this podcast from now on, and also sparked the Bronny to GU rumors. So what do you guys think?
I think it's really interesting that this response was to some random Twitter account too. This wasn't a response to like an ESPN
73-9, and they lied.
What's that?
The Twitter account, the name on it goes 73-9, and they lied.
I think it's an interesting thing that he's going out there looking up Gonzaga tweets and responding to them. I love the Coach Shiznit thing. I'm all on board. Let's get some Coach Shiznit merch out there. Do I think Bronny's coming to GU? Probably not. Do I think he's even going to play college basketball? We'll see. But at the same time, we get a championship between now and the time he starts college. Maybe. I would love to see it. beginning of a whole new era. I think we're already in a new era, but that's next level era if we start getting guys like Bronny to come to GU.
That would be sick. Yeah, I don't think it's going to happen. I mean, LeBron just signed an extension. It's kind of setting things up for Bronny and LeBron to play together, which would be really cool. I mean, nothing like that's ever been done in the NBA before. I know, we got the Griffey Jr. and Senior. I mean, that was kind of a cool thing to happen in Major League Baseball, but I really hope the same thing happens. As you said, Dylan, like very low likelihood that Bronny comes to GU. Probably as close to zero as you can get, I would say. Yeah. I think the other hot take on Twitter was that the Zags were scared to play Baylor and they didn't want any piece of the Big 12, which, give me a break.
Yeah, we waited until 2 hours before the game to decide, you know what? Our game plan just isn't there. We really can't guard these guys. Let's call it, like, somebody call the health department and tell them to cancel this game really quick. Like, come on.
As much as I love Zag Twitter, I think a lot of stuff starts to circulate, stuff like that. Everybody starts talking about all the fans of other teams. I think it also happened with the West Virginia. There was a lot of bitching on Twitter about ref balance or whatever you want to call it in that game towards the end of the game. I think it sucks. Some of their guys fouled out. But in all honesty, they shot more free throws and we were called for more fouls. So I'm not too upset about it. And I think it's a lot of excuse making, which, tends to happen when we play in a cupcake conference, which even this year, shout out to San Francisco for upending Virginia the other week. I don't think we're a cupcake conference anymore.
Well, until we win some tournament games and get past the Sweet 16, I think it's probably safe to say we were scared. So
exactly.
I don't know. My faith in this team is really going down the drain because I haven't paid attention to college basketball since 2000. So,
yeah. I think with all that being said, that's going to wrap up our first podcast. Unlike Gonzaga basketball, we will not be taking time off until December 14th. So we're going to try to put out a podcast once every week as long as there's content to talk about. We'll see what the season ends up looking like. Maybe we'll take a week off here or there. Maybe we'll plug in some interviews, recruiting recaps. Maybe Jalen Suggs can start talking to his boy Chet Holmgren a little bit more. Get some more recruiting magic in Spokane.
Give us a follow on Twitter if you haven't already at Zag Talk. You guys can follow Be Merry and Dylan on there as well. We'll throw that in the description of the episode, but yeah, tell your friends, get the word out there.
Go Zags.
Go Zags.